For Christians, is there such a thing as safe yoga? Christian yoga, holy yoga. Is it possible to take a non-Christian religion, and yoga was founded as a religion in India, and make its claimed benefits compatible with Christianity? My guest in this podcast, Mike Shreve, at one time was teaching yoga at 4 universities. We recently had a scintillating conversation about all the reasons that yoga is not safe from a biblical standpoint. Before you make up your mind about whether yoga can ever be practiced without offending the cause of Christ, don't miss this expose on what's unsafe about yoga. So why did I title today's podcast, 7 Secrets to Safe Yoga? Well, the answer is one word: clickbait. For those who don't know what that is, clickbait is a text or a thumbnail link that's designed to attract attention, entice users to click. It uses a sensationalized or even misleading headline. It exploits the curiosity gap by providing just enough information to make readers curious, but not enough to satisfy their curiosity without clicking through to the link content. So face it, if I entitled this podcast, How Christians Who Do Yoga Get Demons, those Christians who do yoga would immediately tune out. And some of you are watching now. You never would have watched this. But now that you're here, stick with me. In a moment, I'll be joined by Mike Shreve. Now, Mike began searching for God in Eastern religions. While studying under an Indian guru who began teaching Kundalini yoga at 4 universities and running a yoga ashram. Then through a series of miraculous divine interventions, he encountered Jesus Christ. Mike nearly died after ingesting a bad patch of LSD shortly after he entered college. The experience frightened him enough to quit drugs and to begin to explore nearly every new philosophy or belief system that crossed his path. Ayn Rand, Hermann Hesse, Maharbha, and other books by gurus and out-of-the-box thinkers. He even joined an Edgar Cayce meditation group in Orlando, Florida, which used the Lord's Prayer as a basis for occult meditation, but it reinterpreted the prayer to promote metaphysical concepts. Yogi Bhajan, a guru from India who arrived in America to help the flower children find their way spiritually, became a big influence. Mike joins me in a moment to provoke those of you who are doing or are considering doing yoga, and you want to know if that's okay or if it's a demonic danger. Hi, I'm Bob Larson. Millions around the world know me as the real exorcist. I've battled demons for 5 decades. I'm going to share with you what I've learned about how demons and the devil seek to kill, steal, and destroy. And as we always say, please like and share. That is so important to our continuation with significance on YouTube. By liking and sharing, well, you let YouTube know you like us. And if a bunch of you do that, it really helps. And by sharing the message of today, you're going to help somebody, perhaps some Christians who are ensnared in yoga. And subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always know when important topics like this are coming your way. If you really do appreciate what you are about to watch and you are anxious for this kind of message, a serious treatment of the subject of yoga, to get out to the masses of people all over the world, please support us with your tithes and offerings. You know, we're entering the time of year when giving goes like this, but right now it's going like this. So thank you so much for doing something really special. You can text the word give to the phone number on your screen, 833-361-4711, or you can go to boblarson.org and click on the word donate. And remember, so many ways for us to help you. Bob Larson University, 4 departments, a total of 60 courses, and nearly 50 hours of video instruction of a high-quality production. And then, of course, there is our streaming platform, the one-stop place, videos that you don't see anywhere else, exclusively to those of you who are part of XD, our streaming platform. Exorcisms nobody has ever seen, and all other kinds of teaching videos that are just for those of you who subscribe to Ex Dunamis. Mike, really great to have you with me here today, and I was looking forward to talking to you for a long time. I've already talked about your books and everything related to you and your background. I do want to make a couple of comments, though. Among the books that you have is one that I think is really special called In Search of the True Light. And for those of you who have read my book of World Religions, it's like this is a companion book to something like that. So I really would encourage you, if you've got that kind of interest, to get this book. It's a great compendium of analyzing the differences of various religious viewpoints, from the major religions to cults and sects. And then we're going to get into this in just a moment. An excellent booklet called 7 Reasons I No Longer Practice Yoga. And Mike, I got to tell you how this came about. I had just a passing familiarity with you, and my wife was having breakfast with me one morning before I was coming into the office, and we had discussed this topic before, but yoga came up again. And at a prayer group that she attends, she was shocked to find out that when somebody raised the issue of yoga, there was almost unanimous approval of Christians practicing yoga. And I know that doesn't come as any great shock to you, of course. And it really set my wife back. So she said, well, I know we've talked about this many times before. I heard you teach on it, etc., but just walk me through it again. What are the problems? So I walked her through all the different aspects of yoga, what all the issues are. And then when I got home that night, she said, oh, well, I didn't stop there. I found this really great website with this guy named Mike, and he's got some great stuff in yoga. And now I've got plenty of ammunition to go back to the prayer group and talk to these ladies. So thank you for the great work that you have done. Mike, let's start out with your background and this transition that you made, what it was, the epiphany that turned your life around from this deep enmeshment in yoga.
Well, Bob, I so appreciate being on this interview with you. And I'd like to start off by thanking you, because back around 1980, I had been saved about 10 years at that time, and I bought this book.
Oh my goodness, Larson's Book of Cults.
And you can see how worn out it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's frayed, it's fallen apart. I carried this with me for about 20 years as I traveled around evangelistically. And I believe I quoted from that book in the book you just held up, In Search of the True Light. So thank you for your contribution to my life that you didn't even know about.
Well, I'm very grateful for that. Thank you so much. And really what that brings up is the fact that 20, 25, 30 years ago, when I was kind of a lone voice warning people about this sort of thing, I could have had no idea the explosive growth that Eastern religions, meditation, and yoga would have. What was it that finally turned your life around?
Well, it was a series of events that I believe God himself orchestrated. He rescued me. I was teaching yoga at 4 universities. I was considered a guru by about 300 followers. I was running a yoga ashram, which is a commune where people study together on a more intense level. Every day started out at 3:30 in the morning with hours of meditation and mantra yoga and various things. And then the Tampa Tribune newspaper in Tampa, Florida, sent a reporter out to interview me because at that time, 1970, I was somewhat of an oddity in their community. And so they wrote up this huge article that I thought would increase my class attendance. Instead, it alerted a local prayer group to start praying for me
Oh,
on a
boy.
continuing basis. They had a 24-hour prayer chain. They made copies of that article out of the Tribune, sent it out to all of their prayer partners, and I was being brought before God every hour of every day for about 3 or 4 weeks, where they were petitioning God. And this was a faith filled, power packed prayer group. They knew how to
Wow.
pray. And then the wheels started turning because I got a letter from an old friend of mine who had left college the same time I had, but to study under a different guru. And he wrote me this incredible letter, surprising, about how he had walked in a church. He heard an audible voice say, Jesus is the only way. And he said the Spirit of God fell on him, filled up his heart, and he was born again. Now, I was raised Catholic, and I'd never heard this term being born again. And so that intrigued me. But also, what intrigued me deeply was the fact he said God was external and came into him, where in yogic philosophy, Hindu philosophy, the teaching is that there's a spark of divinity
Right.
already inside of us. So to find God, you look within. So that intrigued me. And after about 4 or 5 days, I thought, I am a truth seeker. And even though I cannot agree with a lot of tenets in Christianity, I'm going to open my heart to the possibility that maybe Jesus is the way. And so I dedicated one day to him. And I said, Lord Jesus, if you are the Savior of the world, if you did die for the sins of humanity, if you are the only way, the truth, and the life, as you claimed, then give me a sign today. Show me. And I was expecting an audible voice, a vision, some type of supernatural experience, but God had his own way. And that afternoon, I was scheduled to teach a yoga class at the University of South Florida in Tampa. I had to hitchhike because I owned no material possessions. And so I was hitchhiking to go teach the class, but I was still praying, saying, Jesus, this is still your day, and I'm not stopping seeking you. So if you're real, show me. Well, 2 miles away, one of the members of the prayer group, who just happened to be a former yoga student himself,
Wow.
so that he could talk my lingo, he was walking in a laundromat. And the Holy Spirit spoke to him and said, don't go in there, get back in your car and start driving. I've got a job for you to do. So kind of not really frustrated, but puzzled why God didn't want him to wash his dirty clothes. He threw them in the back of his van and got behind the wheel and started driving. And whenever he felt an impulse, he turned. It's so important to follow those impulses. And he drove about 2 miles and saw me hitchhiking. And he never picked up hitchhikers, but he felt that impulse again. So he pulled over. I opened the door, and on the ceiling of his van was a picture of Jesus that he had taped there. My heart jumped. I knew this is my answer. And within about 20 minutes after we conversed, I knelt down with him in the back of his van and gave my heart to the Lord Jesus Christ. He came into my heart. I was born again. I had such a real encounter, Bob, that I knew I could not mix yoga practice with Christianity.
What was it? What was it philosophically or theologically that came to light? Or was it the experience itself that you found something more dynamic than having your chakras balanced?
Well, at the time, I didn't know a lot of the theological differences, but I just knew intuitively this was wrong. And I knew that I had gone down a completely erroneous path. And so I asked the man who won me to the Lord to accompany me, and he took me to the yoga class there. And I announced to them that I would no longer be teaching because I believe Christian yoga is an oxymoron. I don't believe you can mix the worldviews. And I said that I had found Jesus, and I explained to them the salvation experience. Most of my students became Christians, and that happened in almost every one of the classes. Quite a few people got converted. I shut down my ashram, and no one told me to do it. I just knew, again, intuitively, the Holy Spirit speaking to me, that I needed to burn all my books. I didn't know in the book of Acts that's what they did with their occult books and paraphernalia. But I had a 50-gallon drum behind the yoga ashram. I carried all my books from different yogis and gurus and all my yoga paraphernalia, dumped it in the can and burned it up.
I've got to ask you at this point, if you just minutes or hours old in the Lord, having just had this awakening, understood so clearly this dichotomy and knew that you could not continue. I'm sure it's very frustrating to see what's going on, and even in evangelical Christianity today, where this sort of thing is being accepted. How could you see it so quickly, and why do these Christian yoga groups not get it?
Well, I believe, first of all, it was because I was already familiar with the Bible to a certain degree, because I read it along with the Bhagavad Gita and the Adi Granth and the Quran and all the other supposed sacred books. So I was familiar with the teaching of Jesus to a certain limited degree, and I'm sure that helped. But I saw, most of all, the blatant difference when you mention the cross and the price Jesus paid for the redemption of the human race, and how that is not found in Hinduism or Sikhism or Buddhism or any of the Eastern religions or New Age spirituality. And I thought, if that's what just brought me to a salvation experience, and it's absent from all these other worldviews, why even try to mix them? I'm sure it was God helping me see the contrast, and not because I had any kind of theological prowess.
But to me, that's it's self-evident. Anybody who has even a peripheral understanding of yoga knows that. But I don't think, and we're going to get into this in a moment, because you got this great pamphlet I referred to here called 7 Reasons Not to Do Yoga, and it is not safe. I'm still not quite understanding your perspective on the blindness of Christians who go right down the path that you so quickly got away from it. We know that the God of this world has blinded the eyes of those who do not believe, and they don't want to believe for some reason. This accommodation of Eastern mysticism into the Christian way of thinking, it's an amalgam that is just taken over our society. Why is it they don't get it? Just do you understand it? Do you ever just kind of get frustrated and say, "You dumb Christians, you don't get it"?
Well, I get plenty of flack on the internet of people rejecting what I have to say. But don't you think, Bob, that part of the reason is for this megatrend is because of this megatrend in our society toward tolerance and mixture and compromise.
Yeah.
It's like a general mindset that's permeated the culture. And unfortunately, a lot of Christians don't pray enough and don't read the Bible enough and don't fellowship with strong believers that are uncompromising in their walk style. And they think you can mingle the two things, and you can't, because he said, come out and be a separated people and do not touch the unclean thing. I'm reminded how when the Ark of the Covenant was captured by the Philistines, they tried to put it in a temple, a religious structure, a building dedicated to the false god Dagon, which was half fish and half man. And they came in the next day, and the statue of Dagon had been tipped over on its face. Apparently an angel went in there in the middle of the night, or maybe God himself did it. And then they tried to re-erect it, and the next day It was on his face, but decapitated, and I think the hands were cut off also. So they were trying to mix the true God, represented by the Ark of the Covenant, and their false God. And you just can't do it. And I don't know why others choose to tolerate and to compromise, but I knew I couldn't do it.
Yeah, but just from a simple standpoint, when people try to debate me on the topic, I just say, do you know what that means? Why are you sitting with your legs crossed? Why are you doing that? Well, they don't have a clue what that means and why they sit in a lotus position, etc. It's like there's an intellectual bypass here of questions that they should be asking about the devotional nature of yoga that they are not asking. I've asked them, Prana, can you tell me what that is? No, we just were told to breathe in the prana. Well, what is that? Well, it's some kind of energy. There seems to be an intellectual blindness, a spiritual blindness, and maybe more than that, an unwillingness to avoid something that could be dangerous. When did we cross over that point in Western culture and in particular in America?
Well, with the Pentecostal charismatic movement that came in the 70s, I believe it balanced things out from a legalistic point of view that maybe evangelical Christianity and Pentecostal Christianity had shifted to. But I believe the pendulum swung too far the other direction and opened the door to compromise in many ways. So I do believe there's a critical balance between legalism and liberalism where you find the truth. And you mentioned several things that I think really, really need to be addressed. First of all, you mentioned how when a person sits in the lotus position, it's normal to have their hand in this position resting on their knees. Now, the guru I studied under taught us that that was so that this energy could flow through our bodies unhindered, which is unnecessary. The Bible never says you have to be in a certain physical position. That's too mechanical. That's not how you seek God. The first time meditation is mentioned, Isaac is walking out in a field. He's not sitting in a lotus position. But this is something called a mudra. And a mudra is a symbolic hand gesture or bodily gesture that represents a spiritual concept. And without getting too complicated, for a Hindu that has a yogic mindset, this forefinger represents Atman, which is the Sanskrit name for the human soul. And these are things you already know, I'm sure, Bob. And the thumb represents Brahman, which is conceived to be the impersonal life force that fills all creation, that is ultimate reality. For many Hindus, not all Hindus, but many Hindus believe ultimate reality is an impersonal force that fills the trees, the animals, the plants, the flowers, every human being. So when I assume that position and put my forefinger to my thumb, that is an invocation to a false god, Brahman, who is not a personal god, but an impersonal force. And I am invoking Brahman to come and fully manifest inside of me and permeate my life. That's demon possession.
But Mike, they're going to argue, well, I don't believe all that stuff. That's not what I want. So the Holy Spirit's going to protect me because I'm not after that.
I realize that, but I believe personally, with all my heart, that whether a person acknowledges these connections or not, it still activates something spiritually. And for instance, I've had Christians tell me, oh, I go to a yoga studio, and when they start chanting Om, I just bow my head and say, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And
I've heard that one so many times. Oh, yes.
I respond to them by saying, why would you drag him into the mud with you? Because you are taking the true God into a temple of idolatry. Because, again, unknown to most people that even speak the word Om in a chanting kind of way, that word represents two primary things. Om, first of all, is taught to be the first word that was uttered from the Godhead, from this impersonal force,
The
as the universe.
primordial sound of the universe. It's all that
Right, the
was in the
primordial
beginning.
sound.
Yeah.
Yeah. That and if you chant that word Om, you come into oneness
Yeah.
with that primordial force conceived to be prominent. So you are saying the name Jesus to try and protect yourself from all these swirling demonic presences that are around you, because that is not the true revelation of the true God. And besides, the word Om, when it's chanted, is stretched out into three syllables:
Yeah.
A, U, and M. And I think it's been 54 years, so I might not remember the association, but I think the A represents Brahma, not Brahman, but Brahma, which is the creator God. And U represents Vishnu, the preserver God, and M represents Shiva, the destroyer God.
You know,
The destroyer God?
yeah, the destroyer. And I have also told people, what you don't realize is that this is a system which is seeking to awaken the Shakti Kundalini power at the base of the spine for union with Shiva at the crown chakra for the third eye enlightenment. That's really what they're trying to achieve, and then union with God, with the one, the absolute of whatever. And they said, well, I don't want to hear about that. I don't care about that. And I'm saying, this is the predication of thousands of years of this philosophy embedded with what you are doing, and you think that the demonic forces are just going to look the other way when they've been using this to destroy people for millennia? I really struggle with somebody who can't get that.
Well, we're on the same page, Bob, because you mentioned that power. It's called the Kundalini in Hinduism. And the word Kundalini means serpent power.
Yes.
Now, when I was first in that process of being converted, that was one of the things that just hit me, that the power I was seeking to unleash was referred to as a serpent, and the Bible uses the serpent as a symbol of wickedness and evil,
Right.
and that which is satanic. And so I thought, I have ventured into the realm of darkness here, because a serpent does not represent anything good. And this is shocking to most yoga people, that the gurus I studied under, and I was involved in groups that took it seriously. We were not just into tuning up our bodies, which is the kind of cultural appropriation or misappropriation that's taking place now in yoga studios. It's all about having a sleek, beautiful, attractive body. Well, in India, it's all about reaching God consciousness.
Right.
And it's a false experience of that. And it's a deceptive experience of that. But the gurus used to teach us that if we did not discipline our lives by withdrawing from the world and living a very ascetic life, if we had an awakening of the Kundalini prematurely, it could drive us to insanity. It could awaken occultic powers in us that would get out of control. It would possibly introduce us to demonic apparitions. So they warned us
Absolutely.
that this thing could result in something very, very dangerous. And Bob, I have people call me from all over the world desiring to be delivered because they went to yoga classes and started having spontaneous Kundalini awakenings and couldn't control it. And it was driving them to the brink of insanity. And my response to people involved in yoga when that subject is brought up is that there's no account in the Bible of a person having an experience with the true God where it drove them to an insane state of mind or occult powers or demonic apparitions. And quite the opposite, quite the contrary. It brings joy and peace and righteousness and wholeness and completion into a person's life. And that in itself, just the fact that they warn you of that, is very indicative of the source. It's a
Very.
serpent power,
Yeah,
and it comes from.
I've, as you know, worked with people demonically possessed in various modalities all over the world, and I've told people probably the most difficult spiritual oppression that I deal with is the spirits of the mind that get in through the meditative practices and through the yogic positions. They seem to have a power that, shall we say, the more guttural kind of demons, lust, violence, anger, murder, whatever, the mind control demons, which are cultivated in yoga, bring about the deepest form of bondage that I've ever encountered. Why is that?
Well, I definitely believe it's demonic. And in fact, I have a personal story of an encounter with a demon after I got saved that helped to prove that to me. But I might mention also that in Acts chapter 16, verse 16, when Paul and Silas were coming into a certain region, there was a woman who was noted for her psychic abilities that followed them and said, "These are men of the Most High God." Now, there's your deception, because she was telling the truth, but the spirit behind it was wrong. And finally, Paul was vexed after a number of days, and he turned around, and the Bible said he commanded a spirit of divination to come out of her. But here's something very disturbing to me. In the original Greek, the word is python. The spirit of python was brought out of her, or commanded to be to depart from her. And so that being a serpentine creature relates, I believe, to the type of spirit that inhabits a person who's involved in yoga, especially those in the philosophical aspect of yoga. And how does a python kill its prey? It encircles that prey and squeezes and squeezes and squeezes until it chokes the life out of the person. Yeah. And I believe that could be an indication, that very symbolic representation of how overwhelming these occult spirits are, because they just surround a person and dominate a person until they take over that person completely.
Very good explanation. All right, we got to jump into these 7 reasons not to do yoga. And going back to my original clickbait, the 7 ways to make it safe. Well, there just ain't no way to make it safe. Let's talk about the 7 things that are foundational to the position you now take. And I'm going to move through these rather quickly. But number 1, don't do yoga because of its spiritual foundation. And we've already talked about that. The asanas, pranayama, the breath work, all these things are part of a system that, even though the Western mind and even the Western Christian mind may try to define it as something else, don't you believe that that foundation is the origin of how the kingdom of darkness works? And we don't have the right to redefine the kingdom of darkness. It is what it is.
Absolutely. In fact, Bob, the word yoga in the Sanskrit language comes from a word that means yoke. And the implication is you are yoking yourself to Brahman. So if you practice yoga, whether you're Christian or a Taoist or a Buddhist or a Hindu, you are yoking yourself to Brahman, that is a false god. And may I remind any and every Christian listening to this interview that when God came down on Mount Sinai and there was a fire that consumed the whole mountain, and his thunderclap voice came out of that mountain, the first directive he gave was, "I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me." And so anyone who gets involved in yoga is breaking the first commandment.
Absolutely.
I mean, as simple as that. Yeah. As simple as that.
All right. Second on your list is the spiritual perspective. And we've sort of talked around this, the idea of pantheism, animism, the divine essence of God that exists in all of creation. And also, you don't mention it here, but then there's also the philosophy of Maya, the illusory nature of
Right.
matter,
Right.
that there is no matter. We think that this microphone is a metal object, but it's not really. It's just an illusion. All is an illusion. That is the spiritual perspective of yoga.
Right. Because a little over 50% of Hindus belong to a sect called Advaita Vedanta Hinduism.
Mm-hmm.
And Advaita Vedanta Hinduism believes in the utter oneness of the Atman with Brahman. In other words, the idea, the concept that you don't have a relationship with God, you don't need a relationship with God because you are God. You need to have an awakening, a realization of your inherent divinity. And that's the goal of yoga. See, you've mentioned asanas and pranayama. Well, that's the third and the fourth limb of something that's called the 8 limbs of yoga.
Yeah.
And I go into this very great detail on my website, thetruelight.net. But the 8 limbs of yoga are supposed to lead a person to the ultimate goal of samadhi. And samadhi is that point of revelation they teach where you realize you are God, which
Exactly.
is the antithesis of the truth. So the spiritual perspective that is offered in yoga is absolutely at the other end of the spectrum from the truth. It's utter falsehood. It's very similar to what the serpent tried to convince Eve of in the garden. And I believe it's as dangerous a practice as any Christian could be involved in.
I agree completely. I'm going to skip over the third reason you give, which is spiritual deception, because we've really talked about that. I do want to talk, though, about Shaktipat and point number 4, spiritual transfer.
Very important.
And as you know, many of these gurus, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh was really big on this, as well as some of the others, of just communicating instant enlightenment just with a touch, gazing into their eyes. In deliverance realm, it's referred to as a soul tie or a soul connection. And that's really what's being made with that guru. The look on the vacant look on the face of many of these disciples as they wait for their moment of Shaktipat, spiritual transference. It's almost like that guy gets into the soul of his devotees.
Yes, that's something I bring up quite often to Christians that try and justify the practice of yoga. I'll ask them, what's the worldview of the person teaching the class? Most of the time, they have no idea. And I tell them, I warn them that if that person leading the class is given over to a Far Eastern mindset, a Hindu type of worldview, then there's going to be a subtle, invisible transfer of spirit from that person to every other person in the class. And when you let someone tell you how to move and when to move and what position to put your body in, etc., then you are surrendering the authority over your body, mind, soul, and spirit to someone who is under the authority of the evil one, the prince of darkness. And so that becomes a funnel right into your life. And I've had people tell me that just by attending a yoga class that was led by someone who was devoted to the Hindu worldview, that they started having weird spiritual experiences in their life. And that's why there's a transfer of spirit. And as you said, Shaktipat is something sought after by most yoga students. And that is that instantaneous awakening of the Kundalini. In the book you held up at the beginning, In Search of the True Light, I talk about, I talk about the Kundalini in there. And there was a particular guru in India that was very popular back in the 70s that people would flock to for Shaktipat. And he described his initial experience with the Kundalini in a really frightening way. And if you'll allow me to read it, I I won't take very long, but I want to show how disturbing it is that people would involve themselves in a practice that could result in this. All right, it's in a section called "What Really Is the Kundalini," which is the serpent power. And Swami Muktananda
Oh,
was this
Muktanandi,
charismatic
of
guru.
course.
Yeah, lots of people in Hollywood
Oh,
flocked to
yeah.
him. I have a testimony on my website, thetruelight.net, of a man who lived in an ashram for 20 years with him in India. And he became a Christian later on. But this is the account of what Swami Muktananda said he experienced when his Kundalini was awakened. He said he encountered a naked ascetic who was blissfully meditating on top of a pile of human excreta. And this Hindu holy man invited him to come and sit on his lap and lick his head. The ascetic then proceeded to initiate Muktananda into Kundalini Yoga. Later that day, he explained, "My mind seemed deluded. I felt I would soon become insane. My entire body started aching. The tongue began to move down the throat. All attempts to pull it out failed. My fear grew, and I felt severe pain in the knot below the navel. I tried to shout, but could not even articulate. Next, I saw ugly, dreadful, demon-like figures. I thought them to be evil spirits. Suddenly, I saw a large ball of light approaching me from the front. It merged into my head. I was terrified by the powerfully dazzling light." And supposedly, that light is God.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I want to bring up
Oversoul.
something here. We've got a couple more of these points to get through. You don't really deal with it, but in this area of spiritual transference, and in this area of the Shaktipat and instant enlightenment and awakening and so on, if I have to be kind of delicate with my language here, because there may be some children watching, but for many of the female followers in particular, this is very orgasmic. It's a very erotic experience, and you know that. And many of the women fall in love with these gurus. And then you have the guys like Rajneesh and others who have later been found out and even discredited in India. It happens all the time. So you will hear from even the authorities in India shut down some of these guys because they have a harem. It's like a sex cult, and many of it does turn into that. This soul connection that they're making between the guru and them. You may think that your local blank, blank, blank church that's practicing Christian yoga is never going to go down that road. I'm telling you, the devil's very deceptive. I've heard some horrifying stories of women speaking of sexual arousal that occurred to them while they're having the Kundalini experience. Can you just briefly address your perspective on this psychosexual thing that takes place?
Well, absolutely. You mentioned a while ago the Kundalini rising up through the spine, not actually the physical spine, but that general position in the human body. Well, that power is the Shakti power, which is envisioned as a female aspect of this energy force. And it rises up the spine to the forehead and the crown chakra, which is Shiva, which is the male counterpart. And when the male and the female come together in this awakening of the Kundalini, so that's when supposedly enlightenment takes place.
Absolutely.
But the overtones are sexual union on a spiritual level. No wonder it results in even some offshoots of various yoga groups practice sexual union with multiple partners as a means of achieving enlightenment. And they think it actually aids them.
Yeah, and you don't know if this yoga instructor is into Tantrism and doesn't even tell you about Tantra yoga, which is another whole subject, which is this sexual illumination that takes place here. All right, fifth on your list, spiritual intrigue. People who get involved in the basic physical exercises often get intrigued by the deeper philosophical aspects of it. to me, it's the old frog in the boiling water. You know,
Right.
you just keep raising the temperature, and I've dealt with so many people. They went into a yoga group or a Christian yoga group with reasonable intentions, all definitionally declaring it to have some type of Christian frame of reference. But over time, there is a subversion that takes place where gradually they begin to think like the Eastern mind, the meditative mind, the yogic mind, and they don't even know when they've crossed over a line, and they're not thinking like a Christian anymore. The term poltergeist is a German word referring to a supposedly friendly or mischievous spirit. But the intent of such demons only appears harmless, like moving objects to further lure you into an occult explanation. Show your interest in such things, and you'll be susceptible to more dangerous demons. Such phenomena usually start out as curiosity. Did you really hear a door open and close? Do you recall leaving a book on a table only to find it in another room? How did the TV suddenly come on? Did you accidentally sit on the remote control? Those flickering lights. Has there been a sudden power surge? These and 1,000 more examples are not the result of a friendly ghost intruding on your life. There are spiritual openings by which demons wedge their way into your thinking. They use small paranormal actions that gradually become more frequent and intense. Please don't set up a camera to try to catch them when you're not there, and don't call in a paranormal investigator. That will only welcome the intrusion of more poltergeists. These demons want your attention with minor contact, so that you won't be shocked by more intensive encroachment. Ignore what's going on and immediately contact a ministry such as ours to bless your home and drive out the poltergeist demons. Sensing a poltergeist doesn't mean that you're psychically gifted. It means that you are personally under intense spiritual attack. The longer you wait to act, the worse it will get.
Let me tell you a personal story,
Okay.
and that's the best way of responding. I normally, when I come into a city, visit yoga studios to witness. I don't participate in the classes. I'll just go and kind of mingle with the teachers if there's an opportunity and talk to them and give them my testimony booklet, which incidentally is a free download on my website. This is available in 12 languages.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, I don't think you have a copy. It's called The Highest Adventure Encountering God.
Well, this is the one I was trying to focus on here, but this is a great one too,
Right.
so I encourage them to get that as well.
Yeah. But anyway, I went to this yoga studio out in Los Angeles, and a very kind, gentle, nice young man that was at the counter. And I walked in and started witnessing to him. He said, "Oh, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian." And I looked around the room, and there's a statue of Buddha, there's a picture of Krishna, and there's a whole stack of Yoga Journal magazines sitting next to the chair. And I said, "I don't see a Bible in here anywhere." And so the danger of it is you've got Christians coming in. They may just do a hot yoga class or a hatha yoga class, which is basically just the asanas, but the physical exercises or the pranayama, the breathing exercises. So they may say, "I'm not involved in that spiritual stuff," but wait a second. You get intrigued about Buddha, who he was, why he did, what he believed. You've got people weak in their worldview or weak in their grasp of what Christianity really is. And they're sitting there with a pile of Yoga Journal magazines that endorse all the Hindu gods. And there's 330 million Hindu
Yeah.
gods according to the traditional number. And so they start exploring, they start digging deeper. And that's why I say that's one of the 7 reasons I no longer practice yoga, because it creates that kind of intrigue, that curiosity, where people think, well, I'm going to go online, I'm going to see what this philosophy is about and that philosophy. And before long, you've been wooed away from a pure biblical standpoint. And that's dangerous.
I think your last 2 points that you make in these 7 steps to understanding the dangers, the spiritual endorsement and the spiritual compromise, that is the point at which the Christian is really seriously at risk for abandoning their faith without even realizing it.
Yes,
And
I believe that.
it's a slow progress, but once you endorse a yogic worldview, even if you don't think you're doing that, you really are, by the postures, by the purpose for the postures, which we both know is something that was delineated thousands of years ago, because this was a certain way to put you in harmony and balance with the Brahma, and to allow these powers to rise up within you. At some point, they cross over that line, and they who were yoked to Christ become yogically yoked to the powers of darkness and to a worldview that is antithetical to what we believe as Christians. So what do you say to someone who is on that trajectory? They've just gotten into it and they just feel better and they're more relaxed, and maybe they're even playing some Christian music while they're doing all of this stuff. What is the warning about where this ends up?
Well, you mentioned spiritual endorsement, which is, I believe, the 6th point. And if I, for instance, let me put it on myself, if I, as a former yoga teacher, proclaiming to be a Christian evangelist and author, were to start attending yoga classes, even though I might just go to the basic hatha yoga classes that strip it of all its spirituality, I would still be endorsing a system. And someone who is weak in the faith might say, oh, Mike Shreve, he goes to yoga classes and he's saved, so it must be all right. And I believe that's the danger of it on that particular level. And I liken it in the booklet, I liken it to how Paul talked about food that's been offered to idols. And he kind of dismissed the danger of it. He said, the idols are nothing, the food, well, in essence, paraphrasing, he said, you can bless it and eat it, it's not going to affect you. But if someone who is weak in the faith sees you eating food that's dedicated to an idol, then it could corrupt them, because they think, well, that idol must be real. There must be some legitimacy to this practice, not knowing that you just completely dismiss it as a fraudulent view altogether. You just needed a meal. But what is seemingly harmless to you becomes extremely harmful to someone you influence. And that's why I make that point.
So, to the person who is watching us right now and who is doing holy yoga, Christian yoga, or some variant thereof, we're not passing judgment on their faith position nor on even what their motives are. And I think it's very important to say that. But even though we're not standing in judgment over those things, what we are judging is behaviorally what they do that connects with a religious system that is the enemy of Jesus Christ and the gospel. They need to think about that. They are sleeping with the enemy, so to speak.
Yes.
Without realizing it. So what do they do at that point? If somebody's heart is touched right now and they're having a come to Jesus moment, saying, what have I done? Now I get it. Give me just a couple of steps for that person to go through You talked about obviously burning, getting rid of, throwing out your yoga mat and
absolutely.
all the books by all the gurus, autobiography of a Yogi Paramahansa Yogananda, and all this kind of stuff. Just throw it out. You don't need to do the autobiography of a yogi. What are some steps, practical steps they could take to walk back away from that?
Well, of course, they need deliverance. They need someone with the authority of the Spirit to take them through deliverance in order for them to be cleansed of that involvement. And as you just said, they need to get rid of every attachment, even a Buddha statue in the garden behind your house. That's an attachment to a false worldview. Break it. Don't sell it. Don't introduce somebody else to the same compromise. Don't sell the books. Don't sell the CDs. Get rid of them. Destroy them, because that will destroy some of those soul ties, as you call them, as you're doing it. And I encourage, Bob, I encourage the people that I pray for that find the Lord. And on our website, thetruelight.net, I have the stories of a lot of people who have been converted out of Eastern religions and out of yoga. And some of them I won to the Lord. And I urged them not to cut ties with the people that they were involved with completely in a hostile kind of way or a hateful kind of way. I said, don't interact with them for a season. You need to get biblically rooted. So for a while, don't communicate with them. Get sound doctrine in your life. Start reading the Bible and the Bible alone, and get full of the Word, and get your prayer life right. But then at a certain point, when you're strong enough spiritually, I said, all those former contacts, that's your database to bring people into the kingdom of God. You can get your testimony in their hands and get them free from that deception. And so I do encourage people to still be loving, because the tendency sometimes for people when they come out of a cult is to ricochet back toward those other cult members with kind of a hateful attitude.
Yes.
And it was love that brought me into the kingdom of God, not a hateful attitude. But it's a critical mixture there. Like the old saying, hate the sin, love the sinner. You've got to hate the false religious practice, but love the person that's involved in it. And so that would be one of my main encouragements for people to still maintain a loving connection with people who are advocates of those worldviews, not to the point where you go out with them to eat all the time and get corrupted by that false worldview, but to the point where you can influence them for the truth.
Wonderful. Mike, it's been a real pleasure to have you with us. I feel like we barely scratched the surface of what all of this represents, and there's so many tangential things connected to this whole yoga world system. We didn't even get into meditation. That's going to have to be a subject for another time. But it's amazing what has happened to you, the transformation. You didn't just come out of yoga. You came running full speed into the gospel of Christ and preaching and sharing. You got a great website. It's wonderful. I encourage people to go there. And as I said, people who have maybe read books like Walter Martin's Kingdom of the Cults, my book on world religions, and Larson's book of cults, you need to add this to your library, In Search of the Light, because it's a great book. I encourage them to go to your website and contact you. And a pleasure to meet you personally. I look forward to talking to you again sometime in the not too distant future. And I'm just thrilled that not only did you come out of darkness, you have really plunged into the light to a great extent and studied to show yourself approved unto God, so that you could become a valid, respected spokesperson for the kingdom in opposition to all of this darkness. Thank you for joining us. I pray that there are many of you who are going to roll back the tape, so to speak. You're going to take another look at this, because a lot of this information flew by you so fast. Mike and I know a lot about this topic. I've spent a lifetime studying Eastern religions, meditation, yoga, and so on. I've been all over India, all over Asia. I've been up to Kathmandu. I've been everywhere informing myself on a first-person basis with what Eastern religions are all about. And so I'm very insightful on this, as Mike is as well. But some of you may have not paid that much attention to it. And a lot of the terminology and the concepts may have escaped you. So please go back and take a look at it and encourage a friend or a loved one who's into Eastern religions or meditating or doing yoga to be sure to watch this. It is so important for this information to get solid, biblical, credible information out there that will change the dynamics of how people see these kinds of evil things. Now, I want to say to you, if you've done yoga or Eastern meditation as an exorcist, I can tell you there is a high probability that you have demons. I'd love to spend a ministry session with you in person or virtually. So why don't you contact us right away about that? And then, of course, we do have our associate ministers all over the country, all over the world for that matter. And we have our Do What Jesus Did teams, groups of highly trained folks who I have personally mentored. They've been through Bob Larson University. They know what they're doing. Be careful when you reach out to somebody for deliverance. I see so many people who are damaged by well-meaning folks, but they've not done their homework. They really don't understand what they're doing at the level they need to. And believe me, if you're fighting yoga and Eastern religions, these are very difficult demons to deal with, and it requires a certain level of knowledge and spiritual understanding to deal with the demons behind it. So get in touch with us. Let me go face to face with your yoga demons, with your meditation demons, or whatever occult demons you have become involved with. I want you to know something. In spite of the bondage you may be in, there is always hope through Jesus Christ. And if we can have the privilege of ministering to you through our books, through our videos, through Ex Dunamis, through Bob Larson University, or a personal ministry session, it can make all the difference in the world. Through Jesus Christ, you can get free, stay free, and live free.
Your financial support and prayers make it possible for us to bring hope for the hurting and freedom to those in spiritual bondage. For the latest information regarding ministry outreaches, go to boblarson.org or call 303-980-1511.